DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia.
Hello and welcome to DogWorks Radio. I am your host, Robert Forto, and today we're talking to Suzanne Elshult from the Seattle area in Washington. This is going to be a fascinating interview because we're going to dive deep into the world of search and rescue dogs, historical searches, and even cadaver dogs. Suzanne and her dogs work in often very difficult conditions along with law enforcement to help those in a time of need. Are you ready to get started?
From First Paw Media, sponsored by Alaska Dog Works Professional Canine Training Center in Anchorage, Alaska. This is DogWorks Radio, committed to families and their dogs to build lifelong and fulfilling relationships. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now here are your hosts, Robert and Michele Forto.
I am joined today by Suzanne Elshult, calling in from the Seattle area of Washington. Suzanne, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Could you do us a quick favor and just give us a brief bio? Tell us who you are and what you're all about, please.
Okay. Well, I'm Suzanne Elshult. I am a search and rescue canine handler here in Washington State. So I've actually done search and rescue missions even internationally in Scandinavia. I have two canines right now, two Labrador retrievers that are certified human remains detection dogs, and they're certified as historical search dogs. I started in search and rescue in 2001. I was inspired by 9/11. In fact, 2 months after I watched the second tower fall on my TV, I walked in the door with my first Labrador retriever, and I'd found a small canine group here in Washington that I joined up with. And since that time, it's been a lifestyle, 15 to 20 hours a week.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for your service. I know it's all volunteer service for the search and rescue work, and I'm definitely interested in that. So let's get a couple of background questions, Suzanne. You had mentioned that you got involved with search and rescue in 2001, right on the heels of 9/11. But what was your dog training experience or working with the dogs prior to that, if you had any?
Very little, if anything. It was, I'm an executive coach by profession, and I spent many years in the corporate world commuting several hours a day. And so my lifelong dream of getting a dog had been postponed until 2001, when I actually had left the corporate world. I'd started my own coaching practice, and I was working from home. So I was a complete novice when I entered search and rescue canine. What I did bring to the table, though, was a lifetime of mountaineering experience, and both the dog handling and the mountaineering experience are equally important when you handle a search and rescue dog, particularly here in the Pacific Northwest in our rugged terrain.
So let's break these down a little bit and talk about each discipline of your training with your dogs. And we're going to talk about books. We're going to talk about TV shows. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff that regarded around these awesome dogs that you have. But let's talk about search and rescue work first. I am very familiar with the Seattle area. I live in Alaska, and as a matter of fact, just flew up from Seattle last night. But Seattle is very interesting in that it's a very urban core, but on both sides of you, you have some really rugged terrain, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have the Olympics looking out to the west. In fact, from my house right now, I'm looking at the Olympics across the Sound. And then, of course, to the east, we have the Cascade Range. And that's where I actually got my beginning, because my first dog I trained as a wilderness air scent dog, looking primarily for living subjects, lost hikers, mushroom pickers, hunters, climbers, you name it. And so we did the majority of our work in our early years looking for live subjects in the Cascades.
So, if am I correct that most of the folks that you're looking for on these search and rescue missions, not necessarily folks that have perished, but possibly lost or whatever, are folks that are pretty much day hikers from the city? They get out there, they get above their pay grade, so to speak, and they can't find their way back.
Yeah, I would say that a great majority of the subjects that we look for fall into that category. And, it's deceptive. You're looking up at the mountains and you think you're going to have a nice day hike. And then all of a sudden, when you return home in the afternoon, the temperature is freezing. And what had been slush and rain before is now all of a sudden ice. And I would say a large number of our subjects suffer from hypothermia, even when the temperatures are in the 50s. And one of the things I found out early on was that I guess I was surprised by how many of the people we're looking for are actually deceased. And that ultimately led to my interest and my shift in focus to human remains detection. And my current dogs, both my young 4-year-old Killy and Cab, who is my older dog, are now focused on human remains detection. I was talking to the director of the Washington State SAR Planning Council the other day, and he's the person that plans, major, complex, lengthy, large searches here in the Pacific Northwest. And he said, this last year of the 14, I think, missions that he had been involved in, 13 of them had ended with tragedy.
Oh my goodness. And it goes right back to what we were saying. It is such a rugged area, just a few miles from a major metropolitan area. You can really get yourself into trouble. Suzanne, if we can, let's zoom in on the training a little bit. First off, you said that you chose a Labrador Retriever right after 9/11. And of course, there's all different specialties with search and rescue and disaster response. But why did you choose a Labrador over other breeds?
Well, I did a little bit of research, and I'm kind of an extroverted person primarily. I mean, I do have an introverted trait. I like my alone time as well. But I wanted a dog that kind of matched my temperament. And in the research I did, and a friend of mine had a Labrador Retriever that I just loved, and she was just in the process of getting a puppy from the breeder up here on one of the islands in our San Juans. And I went with her when she went to have her puppy assessed, and the breeder then told me that she had a puppy available that might work out for search and rescue. And of course, I fell in love with this little guy immediately. And that was the end of that. Like I said, I walked out 2 months later with a leash on my first canine search and rescue dog.
So, with a search and rescue team, and it truly is a team, it is a dog and a handler working together. There's quite a bit of training involved, not only for the dog, because a lot of times that comes natural in terms of, smelling instincts, etc. But there's a lot of work that has to be done on the human side as well. I mean, just everyday Joes just can't walk out into the wilderness with their pet Labrador and say that they're a search team, can they?
Absolutely. And, actually, in my mind, a search team is a tripod. It's the handler, it's the sensor, the dog, and it's the field support person. And that person is absolutely critical to a successful deployment. It's the person that handles navigation, handles radio communications, looks out for hazards, and it's the second pair of eyes on the dog. And so, to me, it's a triad. And I learned the hard way how important it is to select the right dog, because my first dog ended up being kind of a medium drive dog. And he ended up, he turned out as a good dog for wilderness search and rescue, but only because of all the work I had put into it. I really had to work hard to get his drive up to the level that we need and get the right reliability that we absolutely have to have. If you're out looking for a 2-year-old that's lost, you can't have a dog that's not reliable and decides to go chase a squirrel and bypass, the 2-year-old. And so, yeah, I think it's, critically important to know what you're looking for. And I learned that the hard way. And but by the time I got my second and third dog, I absolutely approached the process in a very different way. And with regard to your statement about the human end of the leash, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that the the failure rate of a canine search and rescue team, in my experience, in my 22 years of doing this, is very high. I mean, only a small percentage of teams that try out actually make it through. And people might think, well, that's because the dog can't do it. And yes, there are times when, the dogs aren't cut out for it. It's not their kind of game. But most of the time, I would say it's the human end of the leash. And it's people that may have watched 9/11 and the dogs deploying on the rubble, and they come out with this rosy-eyed picture of what it's going to be like. And then once we take them out here in the Pacific Northwest rainforest, where there are times you can't even walk through the underbrush without a machete, they quickly end up saying, well, maybe this is not for me after all. And I had the additional challenge of having to learn about canine handling. I had the navigation and the mountaineering and all of that. I already had pretty much under my belt. But and I'm the kind of person that I will only do things 150%. So, I ended up certifying through Claire and Pryor as a certified training partner. And I'm very much an advocate of positive training, and which doesn't mean that, I don't think there aren't times when you need to correct the dog, but, I think that positive training, positive reinforcement is the foundation for building a really successful search and rescue dog.
Such good advice there. And it really shows to our listeners how some of these basic principles of dog training, of course, we're a dog training podcast, really translate to a much more advanced type training when you're dealing with literally life and death situations. I think that is such a key component to this, that it's based on those foundations of dog handling and dog training for sure. So let's stick with this search and rescue side of this for just a bit. And I want to talk about your book and your TV show and the awards and all that. But we had mentioned at the top of the show, Suzanne, that this is purely a volunteer endeavor. You guys are called out by law enforcement or other agencies like that, and they say, "Okay, this is a situation we got to go." What is the time commitment for this? Is it a 12-hour shift, and then you sort of rotate teams out? Give me a kind of a play-by-play, if you will, on a weekend search for a lost hiker. How does that go for you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, the time commitment is huge. And so it's absolutely critical you have the support of your family, because, you will be called during Thanksgiving dinner. You'll be called when your kids are having a soccer match or whatever, and you need to be ready to drop everything and go. I mean, it is volunteer. We're not required to go on missions, but once you get involved in this thing, it becomes it becomes a passion. I mean, it becomes a lifestyle for people that get involved in it. And like I mentioned earlier, I think for me, over the years, on an average, I have committed 15 to 20 hours a week. Wow. Just to training with my dogs and helping other teams, coaching and training other teams to become certified canine teams. We usually, I mean, for me, I take my dogs out hiking an hour and a half every day. And I usually, as part of that, set up some little problem. And it might even just be a negative search, but just to keep them totally fresh. Then, in addition to that, we usually have at least one evening a week when we get together as a group, or a subgroup at least, where we train together so we can run blind problems. And then usually at least a full day every weekend. So that's the time commitment. Then on top of that, you have the call outs to missions. And, usually when we're called out for missions here in the Pacific Northwest for missing hikers and things, it's usually Sunday evening at 11 o'clock. And it's
Yes.
usually stormy and cold and snowy and horrible.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah,
They've not made it back to the, to the trailhead or something like that, and somebody calls and
exactly.
next. And so, what is the time commitment once you're out there? Is there a shift? Is it, how does that work? If you're called out on Sunday evening and you go to work, when can you realistically say that your part of the mission is done?
It totally varies. I mean, I would say the majority of missions, I end up going back home after a day, and then maybe redeploying the next day and the next day. But there have been missions when I've been out, multiple days, having to bivvy on top of a mountain somewhere in the rain and sleet. Um, Now that I'm doing more human remains detection, and my focus has shifted more towards crime scene and cold cases and historical search, it tends to be more scheduled, which is one of the things that, after 22 years of doing this, there are some things you start burning out a little bit on. And if nothing else, your family starts burning out on getting woken up in the middle of the night. And so I don't want to do that as a general rule, all the time. I mean, there used to be times when I was on 3-4 missions in a week and 2-3 missions on a weekend. It was just my life.
Wow,
And yeah.
that is a lot of time commitment, especially as you mentioned with all that training and outings and just your typical hikes. So let's talk about Keb a little bit. He is truly a superstar. It's a he, right? A male?
It's a she,
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
I know. No, the name sounds like a male, but I named my mountains after my dogs after mountains I've climbed. And so my little guy, his name is Kili after Kilimanjaro, and Keb is named after the highest mountain in northern Sweden, north of the Arctic Circle, Kebnekaise. And
Okay.
that was another mountain I climbed.
Well,
So yeah,
apologies.
sorry about that.
She is truly a superstar. She is an award-winning search and rescue dog. Just received an award just a bit ago. You guys were on a TV special just a couple of days ago, and guys, we're going to have the link to that video here in the show notes, as well as a brand new book called A Dog's Devotion: True Adventures of a Canine Search and Rescue Team. You guys not only are busy in the field, but you're busy in the media markets as well, aren't you?
I've become busy in that arena. I was actually approached by my search and rescue partner, Guy Mansfield, about 5 years ago about writing a book. And to tell you the truth, initially I was really lukewarm to the whole idea. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And I don't want to spend my time doing that. But then he kept working on me, and he kept saying things like, this is an opportunity to really shed light on the important work that canine search and rescue teams do. And most people don't even understand that we're non-compensated, and how much time we commit to this. And so I ended up getting back to him after a few months saying that, well, if we can do that, increase public awareness, and if we can also inspire people to go for their dreams, no matter what challenges and obstacles are thrown their way, I said, then I can get excited about this idea. And so that's how the idea of the book was born. And we had no idea it was going to take 5 years to get to the actual publication. And there was a really steep learning curve to, understand how to work with and get our New York agent and get the reputable publishing company. And yeah, it's been quite the trip.
Yeah, well, congratulations to you and Keb for all of your amazing work that you've done there. Suzanne, you had mentioned earlier that you think of the search and rescue team as sort of a triad or a tripod. Is Guy the third leg of the wheel, if you will, on this, or is he a team as well with his own dog?
No, in the book that it covers 10 years of Cab's career. And during that period, Cab and I deployed on more than 100 missions. And on many of those, Guy ended up being my field support.
Okay.
And so we had those, life and death experiences together with Cab. And, anywhere from being deployed on the largest landslide tragedy here in Washington State to being airlifted onto Mount Rainier with Cab. A lot of unforgettable moments of both tragedy and exhilaration and celebration.
Again, congratulations on that award for Keb and all of that has come with that. So, Suzanne, let's shift gears a little bit. Something that I'm very interested in is the historical work that you do with your dog. I'm familiar with cadaver dogs and search for deceased folks and that sort of thing. But this is a whole new area that I am not too familiar with. Can you break that down for us a little bit and tell us how you're involved and what exactly that's all about?
I'll try. It actually came about 2-3 years ago. I started hearing about, actually I'd heard about it from my archaeologist friend in Sweden in 2017, I think it was. She introduced Cab and me to Stone Age bones. We actually worked Cab on those and did it successfully. And I became really intrigued with the whole idea. And then to make a long story short, I ended up finding out that there is a historical search organization here in the Pacific Northwest, the Canine Forensics Foundation. And Cab is now approaching her golden age. She's still in very good shape for being 12 years old because of the work I do with her every day, hiking and things, but she's definitely slowed down. So the last thing you want to be when you go out on search and rescue missions is to become a liability for your team.
Right.
And so I started proactively thinking about, what am I going to do with Keb when she can't do the mountaineering work anymore? Because all she knows is how to use her nose. It's been her life since she was 8 weeks old, and I would be the last to want to deprive her of that. And so then the idea popped up in my head, what about these historical teams? So I approached the Canine Forensics Foundation, and I also approached a guy in Tennessee. His name is Paul Martin, who does a lot of historical search, anywhere from, uncovering slave graves to he's been over in Europe, finding, remains from wars and so on and so forth. And I had, together with some of my canine search and rescue friends, established an organization called Cascadia Search Dogs. And we are a not-for-profit organization that is dedicated to bringing quality training to search teams here in the Pacific Northwest. And so we bring in master trainers from different parts of the country. We just had somebody from Iowa here. And then we discount the rate for people here locally or in Washington State by getting by doing fundraising, that kind of thing. But anyway, Paul Martin was invited to come out here and get a group of 12 canine teams exposed to historical search. And this was a few years back, probably 2-3 years ago. And anyway, to make a long story short, that is what got me started in it. And both my dogs and I have been training for historical search now for 2 years. And we were just certified just a few months back and deployed on our very first mission. And we have several coming up here in 2023. And typically missions range from maybe working with Native American communities to locate old ancestral graves, to working with construction companies that maybe are required to make sure that there aren't old cemeteries and ancestral graves in areas where they want to do construction of some kind. So a lot of times those are government type projects. And, one of my secret dreams is that I'll be able to become involved in some way in the dark history of the boarding schools. And, dogs have been successfully deployed to locate some of those old graves of children. And anyway, so that's on my to-do list for 2023. I'd like to reach out and see if there's any way we can support that.
This is so interesting, Suzanne. I've heard a little bit about this, but definitely it has not been on my radar. But as you said, this could be something as basic as somebody building a house that could potentially be on sacred ground, all the way back, as you mentioned, to work with old graves from the slavery period and even further back. That is. What a way to give back. That's such a cool thing. And I'm thinking just to make this a little bit lighthearted if we can, because obviously we're talking about human sacred remains in places. This is sort of like Indiana Jones with a dog, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Yes, maybe there's a movie there's a movie in your future with a fancy fedora and a leather jacket, and who knows.
You never know. Yeah.
Very good, very good. So we've covered, Suzanne, in our time, search and rescue, sort of that mountain type terrain, as well as this historical work. But you also mentioned working with law enforcement agencies on cadaver work or deceased persons, cold cases, that sort of thing. And we only have a few minutes left. How does that work fit into your daily grind, if you will, with your work with your dogs?
Well, nowadays it's what I primarily focus on, and frankly, for old cold cases, the training is very similar to the training we do for historical work. We use primarily old bones, human bones, and teeth. So I become friends with dentists. For crime scene, let's say something that's more recent, we have to expose our dogs to and get them trained on the odor of the full range of human decomposition. And so that can, for example, involve, I've gone to multiple body farms. There is one in Texas, the Forensics Anthropology Center, Texas State University, where dog teams that do this kind of work are invited to actually get exposed to full bodies, human remains in various stages of decomposition. Because you can't do this work unless the dogs actually get trained on the real thing. And so, if I have a friend nowadays that tells me that, hey, I'm going to get the knee replacement, I'm the first one to light up and say, oh, I'm now your best friend. Could we have could you ask your doctor or your surgeon if we could have the kneecaps to train on?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So definitely a lot of cross training. And that's my last question here, at least formal question here on the podcast, is what about all this different cross training? Because it's similar, but also different. The search work versus the cadaver dogs versus the historical remains. How is it sort of all obviously it's intertwined because of the dog's nose, but if you could kind of pare it down a little bit, what are the similarities and what are the main differences in the different types of training disciplines?
Well, it's basically, and I mean, my Keb dog was cross-trained and certified in avalanche, in first responder disaster, in wilderness search live, and in human remains detection. Now, my current dog, I'm totally just focused on human remains detection and historical work, Killy, because I think it gives you an opportunity to really dig deep and not go so wide. And Keb truly was a unique dog because she was able to master all of those skills. But, there are guidelines, national guidelines for how many hours a month you should be training your dog for the various disciplines. And I think the number is 16 hours. So if you're if you're certified in 4 disciplines, that's a lot of hours.
Yes, it is.
And the other thing is for human remains detection, there is a likelihood that you may end up in court testifying. And so there's been a trend, I believe nationally, to have more single-purpose human remains detection dogs, because it makes it harder for the prosecuting attorneys to pick apart of what you did and what your dog did on a crime scene, that kind of a thing. So that's one of the reasons that I'm now training single purpose for Keeley.
Wow, you have your hands full, Suzanne. It sounds like you really love what you're doing, and what a better way than getting out in the outdoors and working with your dog. That, for a lot of people that listen to this show, I think that would be a dream come true, and it has been a pleasure to have you on today. Did we miss anything? And if so, please let us know. And also, to end the show, how can folks find out more about you and your dogs? Of course, we're going to put all the links to the videos and the books and all that in our show notes. But are you on social media, Twitter, Facebook, what?
I am on all social media, and you can go to Facebook, A Canine's Devotion, and you can find me under my name on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, you name it. And we have a website called SuzanneElshult.com. And I'm also I'm finishing off 4 years as the president of Cascadia Search Dogs, which is the organization I just mentioned. We're committed to providing quality training here in Washington State to SAR teams. And so I'm basically all over social media.
That's the way you have to do it. That's the way they do it these days, for sure. Well, Suzanne, it is a pleasure, as we said, and we'll definitely direct any questions over to you that way. On behalf of my guest today, this is Robert for Dogworks Radio. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From First Paw Media, this is Dogworks Radio. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert and Michele Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media. Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michele Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.